WRUU-LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah-sounding community radio with global soul. Hello, dear Drumfolk, and welcome to our Revolution ceremonies. This is Dr. David Pleasant with Way Savannah Initiative Radio. Our mission, you ask? To complicate, challenge, syncopate, dismantle, contrast, dissect, and break regularly adjusted narratives, and to suggest and demonstrate that accepted or expected neutrality reproduces unequal power flows. To provide multiple long-range alternatives which have been well-researched, relatable, and useful knowledge benefits ordinarily excluded from adjusted power flows. To assert consistent, serialized, and unapologetic countervailing narratives as normal practice, to indeed polyrhythm, to be creatively maladjusted, to participate in the spirit of Yawpan and Buna, the native and African indigenous customs of powerful discourse and dialogue, accompanied by medicinal tea and coffee and social therapy. It is in this questioning spirit and thought world that we will discover why Juneteenth is not the same as Stono commemoration, why the 4th of July can never be like a 5th of July remembrance, why 1619 pales in regard to the 1526 insurrection, and why generally freedom is the heart to make revolution. Hello, this is Dr. David Pleasant presenting Way Savannah Kanapaha theme of the month, QUAMINO Dolly. I captured Savannah, but you can't capture my spirit. And now to the Kanapaha. Cruising around the streets of Savannah on this growling MT-07 hooligan bike, I cannot help but reflect upon the glaring absence of an equal African and/or native presence in the city. By comparison with all of the antebellum era buildings, outward markers, monuments, and living sycophants costumed and in storefronts, it's hard to believe that this is a majority black city. The plantation vision, though, slavery model, however, is strong to be sure, but the parallel and countervailing truth of both African and native presence as more than slaves or minion leaves much to be desired. It is possible to find out where blacks were victimized, sold, hanged, crying, and harmed, but places of escape, rebellion, and freedom are far from full-scale recognition or meaningful contextualization. The overwhelming feeling here is still just as writer Eric Maso observed in the early 2000s. He said, "The experience was nevertheless disturbing for folks like us who had never been to the South before. To our eyes, slavery had ended in name only. The gulf between the races is so huge that it taints everything. I find myself inadvertently humming the theme to Gone of the Wind as we wander Savannah's famous squares and haunted sites." With that, the report on the historical integrity threat issued on Savannah National Park Service 2017, naming the lack of Native and African heritage as a primary issue, nothing has really changed. The accepted supposition is that a flood of themeless facts and relatively innocuous stories about ordinary town life, plantation victimization, African symbols, appropriated contributions, tasty food, and slave-era lifestyles is good enough. A smorgasbord of factoids has supplanted a thematic and structured contextualization of a people's presence, their full humanity. No sense of balance seems to emerge in the development of content set against a backdrop of unending militarist, colonial, and expansionist vigor. From Oglethorpe to Pulaski to Jefferson Davis, a strengthened bully heritage narrative and customary apartheid ordinary to the city keeps plodding on without a sufficiently balanced counter-narrative. It can be swords, rifles, subjugation, monuments, tributes, kneeling indigenous rape victims, wealth people, ecological harm, expansionism, and valorization glaringly names the agency of a certain some, while others remain in a fog of hidden historicization. To add, the construction of the bully heritage was never a willy-nilly act. It was an established and supported proposition that a conquest and or victorcide interpretation of history serve as a bulwark to any and all other forms of historic representation. It was the consequence of an all-hands-on-deck coalition of post-Reconstruction era forces which consolidated education, public discourse, and policy in Jim Crow terms, separate and extremely unequal. In that regard, the architectures of both material and narrative forcefully revive a who's empowered theme. That theme reproduces potent gravity in the systemic and historic degradation of non-whites in Savannah and the region. As slavery establishes the primary lens, a scope through which the humanity of Africans is framed, an outlook fully imbibed by nearly every official enterprise and institution of historical recollection, it leaves no or little space for multidimensional notions of personhood, free versus enslaved, paid versus coerced, bought and sold versus seller and planner, agent and master versus object and property are but a few of the two-dimensional recollections otherwise do a more sophisticated analysis of human dimension and consciousness. The scope of slavery, nonetheless, is used routinely to calibrate the ways and means of historization and perspectives on either African or Native people's humanity enjoy treatments such as that guaranteed by the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, or even the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which actually states, Article 1, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. Article 2, everyone is entitled to all rights and freedoms set forth in the Declaration without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. Furthermore, no distinction shall be made on the basis of the political, jurisdictional, or international status of the country or territory to which the person belongs, whether it be independent, trust, non-self-government, or under any limitation of sovereignty. At that time, then perhaps a perspective on non-white humanity might emerge here in Savannah and other places which does not have slavery or forced removal as the starting point, center point, or end point of human agency, or as a defining issue of a person's identity, so-called racial identity. As the bike spurs on, I reflect on the many encounters I've had experiencing any effort to fortify rebellion or insurrection historization as an ongoing frontal assertion being just openly discouraged, discarded, avoided, or met with hostility and or contempt. One-time events, piecemeal mentions, or occasional highlighting notwithstanding. The best that happens is that officially chosen and sanitized figures, those with as non-threatening as possible backgrounds, get highlighted. The positioning of slave imagery, however, vigorously persists in place of presentations of rebellion, insurrection, or fight back. The public imaginary is nearly forced into visions of subjugation, submission, slavery, brutality, and appropriation, like coercion of appropriated contributions, as the only acceptable recollections of non-white presence. The main point in this writing is to explore the efforts of the self-determined human being, QUAMINO Dolly, and his committed agency in foiling American patriot interests in the low country of Georgia and South Carolina and in the capture of Savannah, 1778, leading to siege of Savannah, 1779, where the English and the African troops won, the Gullah Geechee people. QUAMINO Dolly, an elder enslaved man 40-plus years, led the forces of Lieutenant Archibald Campbell through the waterways and backwoods of Wilmington Island region, Georgia, into the unsuspecting and outflanked auspices of American Revolutionary forces in and around Savannah. The route taken by QUAMINO Dolly was unknown to the English, and likewise was the only reason that upon their entry to the American side territory, a routing of American forces was possible. QUAMINO Dolly, or Quash, was a crucial and decisive feature in the crushing of patriot resistance in Savannah and the surrounding areas. A marker commemorates the event is now 60 years old. That present marker, however, fails to even mention Quamino Dolly, despite the fact of his monumental agency and heroics in leading the English to the site of one of the grandest victories of the English side Revolutionary War efforts. In fact, the South was the place where the English had their best military successes. This was due in no small part to the military participation and otherwise of Gullah Geechee Creolized African people. This also involves the routing of American patriots and French troops, black Haitian mercenary slaves included, at the Siege of Savannah. The marker in the accepted regional rhetoric talks about the passageway Lieutenant Campbell learned, but leaves out who taught him. That would be Quamino Dolly. Other monuments in the city, just like those of the Confederacy or Revolutionary War, champion losers of battles, of which arguably grander ethical causes prevail. You know, causes like Gullah Geechee troops or African Creolized people literally fighting for their freedom, leading to the routing of the French and black Haitian forces, who were committed to keeping those African American or Gullah Geechee people enslaved here in Savannah. Given Quamino Dolly's agency, some have sought to contextualize his acts as loyalty to his owner, James Wright, last English governor of Georgia. That's James Wright. Others prefer to assume that Quamino Dolly was merely paid a gold coin for his services. Either way, the projections smack with racist cynicism as to the personal agency and or intellectual scope of the man Quamino Dolly. Despite the presence of an owner, good, bad, master, patriot or not, the situation of English involvement in the region precipitated a foreclosure on ordinary slave industry prosperity or questionable land acquisition, which was actually tyranny enjoyed by the patriots as it switched hands from the English. Even African Baptist preachers such as David George and George Lau were in self-emancipatory efforts of either spirituality or telemetry, ushering hundreds if not thousands of once enslaved people away from patriot-owned plantations. That great self-determined agency nearly collapsed slave industry in this region. Quamino Dolly likewise put a wrench in normal slave practice through his outright military intervention with Archibald Campbell. During the period of the Revolutionary War, thousands of self-emancipated Africans joined with the English forces to thwart the selectively independence and freedom-minded patriots. The English, hardly immune to the benefits of chattel slavery enterprise, however, were unlike the Americans. They are not fighting a war for so-called liberty and freedom from the English slavery while simultaneously enslaving and dispossessing African and Native people. Quamino Dolly and many other African and Native people, no doubt, sensed the glaring contradictions of the patriots, in the English too, declaring independence from pre-fascist tyranny and subjugation or war for independence, while in the same instance building that war on the enslaved and dispossessed backs of Native and African people and their ecologies. The patriots sought to escape or destroy tyranny, yet only as a self-serving, privatized interest resolutely denied to African or Native bodies. Some writers on the subject of Quamino Dolly, however, pose a question about Dolly's overarching loyalty. The assumption can be seen in terms of why would a chattel slave Quamino Dolly betray his good masters? This question takes into consideration the daily interactions and operations of Dolly, which most likely he faced patriots and English people who were his masters. It was in these face-to-face circumstances with either loyalists or patriots that he might consider to undermine either loyalist or patriot. Some might ask why he wasn't more like Crispus Attucks, the so-called free black, the first man to be shot for the so-called American independence. A similar question was posed about Nat Turner, too, in regards to a bad master, a good master. And that record of events, Turner was indeed known to have a good master. The same was true of the Stono rebels in the 1730s. The Stono rebels attacked the English plantation system with so-called good English masters. Having so-called good masters, as implied, should settle the issue of loyalty, some think. This is because slaves, African and native people especially, presumably have no affinity for freedom beyond the whims of their naturalized masters. Either with good treatment, you stay and be content. Bad treatment, you run and rebel. Or bad treatment, you remain discontent. Either good or bad, the enslaved was an object, non-sovereign and coerced item of commerce, a peculiar species of property, subjugated, a slave. A good master was rife to produce a slave not antagonistic to slavery, because treatment for some slaves might be considered tolerable or at least stable compared to being a maroon, a Seminole, or somebody who escapes and establishes your own self-emancipation. Only certain people, in this instance of the Americans, have the entitlement and or expectation of seeking liberty as an inalienable and indivisible right of humanities. Others need not apply. They might only apply themselves to transactional versions of freedom. You know, freedom as an instrumentality which might be bartered, traded, or purchased. The win, lose, or draw, hot, cold, rich, or poor ideal of freedom aspired to and privatized for whites was not considered a reasonable option for enslaved persons or native people. QUAMINO Dolly fully and unabashedly flew in the face of that assumption. The capture of Savannah was on his head and his head alone. He did it proudly, with promises from the English, sometimes honorable, sometimes not. African soldiers or spies acted on behalf of their naturalized and independent will for liberty. A will that was personal, but also one which implicated freedom for the whole. In a way, QUAMINO Dolly was the antithesis of Crispus Attucks. The missing acknowledgement of Dolly on the monument, and even more profoundly, out of any serialized or frontal public recognition in Savannah or the region, speaks unerringly of the same second-class, less-than-human subtext in any and all recollections of the colonial project today. Contextualization of blacks through a scope of slavery is the rule of the moment. And that's where the money is made in travel and leisure and tour and everything else, as more of a focus, presence, and a focus issue of determining our humanity. Given the rising impulse to perform wokeness, to display various forms of so-called inclusive and diverse rhetoric, spaces are being variously renamed on top of otherwise pre-labeled colonial, antebellum, Confederate, and municipal power sites. Those honoring white men and white women of vision and fortitude who made a difference are being replaced by other names now. The whole city Savannah, however, rings with abundantly similar architecture and narrative dimension every day and in multiple settings, meaning the whole city is the monument to supremacist assertions. Figures like QUAMINO Dolly, plantation burning maroons, black militias, Moses-like preachers such as David George Lau, marauding Seminoles, King of England black soldiers, modern human rights advocates, you know, like Freddie Washington and etc., however, are not to be found. Either that, or they are supplanted by less threatening figures used to rename things who by identity alone, merely being black or red, appear with no priority or ethical theme. Unlike the heroics of Pulaski, Jaspers, the Calhouns, valorize and champions daily, African or native people represent a flat, dynamics-free zone of which no ethical theme or standard, especially not liberty, justice, or freedom, might ever be a guiding factor or a prominent one. They are famous because they are famous, not because they represent a powerful thematic perspective like liberation. Left over in such non-contextualizations are places to cry, entertain, glorify wealth, get spooked, or reproduce victimization sentiment. Places that would be for self-determined, self-emancipating, self-liberating persons are otherwise filled with approved and officially sanitized figures which, while having a flavor of resistance, in no way display an arresting, frontal, countervailing force, prominent, and regular against the either side, good master or bad American colonial or English colonial project, like the countervailing efforts of QUAMINO Dolly, our fellow Stonewall rebels, Maroons, Seminole, and etc. In other words, as long as the chosen renaming person fits in with the federal narrative disavowing obviously greater evil Confederacy or contra-patriot English, the other name is acceptable. And even then, the heritage narratives of Confederacy and other far-flung oligarchies, English or patriot, still overpopulate numerous displays of history and honor. The imbalance simply carries on. It should be noted, too, that in places other than Savannah, there are tributes to QUAMINO DOLLY. In big cities, musicals, opera, poetry, writings about his heroes, even in England. In Savannah, though, not a mention of them. They fall in the hush mouth or ain't even crocky teeth, blackout. The Maroons, QUAMINO DOLLY, Joe, Seminoles, plantation burning rebels, and etc. contradict an American or English colonial and neo-colonial project, no matter which side that project assumes. For Dolly and the rest, in effect, there is no good master. Either Confederate, Union, Patriot, or colonist, there is no lesser evil. This is the narrative and the legacy of QUAMINO DOLLY and the many, many others like him who recognize an overall failure, still alive and well in the bully heritage narratives of the American psyche and in Savannah today, carried through recollections of architecture and the historic recollection of the Savannah bully heritage narrative. The term American psyche is used to spotlight, in this case, a tendency which transcends the phenotypic boundaries ordinarily applied to racial omission or inclusion. In short, the lack of inclusion or lack of agency and fully recognizing the rebels is spread throughout all American narrative components, whether or not they're black institutions, mainstream ones, Southern heritage ones, or federal ones. The omission simply agrees with the flow-through assumption and implication that non-white persons, as part and parcel of the regular American story, should not and must not assert their right to liberty, justice, equality, or sovereignty, except they be in the terms of officially designated, approved, and reserved positions for them. You know, like Crispus Attucks. And at a time always delayed, which comfortably fits in with constructed standards of tolerance and are to be framed and framed rather in terms of slavery. Always and in all ways in the terms of slavery. The economies of narrative, meaning space available for important content, always seem to operate in a single direction: slavery.
Bike Walk Savannah offers bicycle education programs for children and adults, including bicycle rodeos. Nationally certified instructors ensure that all education programs are safe, informative, and enjoyable for participants. They also offer customized programs for businesses and other organizations that are seeking to make bicycling and walking part of their employees' wellness programs. More information is available at bikewalksavannah.org.
The Live Oak Public Library System offers local residents access to hundreds of thousands of movies, television programs, albums, audiobooks, ebooks, and digital comic books for free on your streaming television and mobile devices through the Hoopla app. Supported devices include Roku, Fire, Apple TV, iPhone, and Android, among others. The selection is vast. All you'll need is your library card. Find the Hoopla app on your device and more information at liveoakpl.org.
What does it mean when we say that WRUU is a community radio station? It doesn't just mean that we invite the community to create programming, and it doesn't just mean that we are a voice for the community. It also means that we are counting on the community to keep us going, and you are the community. Almost all of our modest budget comes from small annual or monthly donations from listeners like you. You get to enjoy our community-focused programming because many others have stepped forward to do their part. Now do your part by joining our community of listener donors. Go to wruu.org right now and make a one-time or monthly donation. And thank you for supporting Savannah's community radio station, 107.5 FM.
QUAMINO DOLLY, Part 2. For instance, the renaming of Calhoun Square in Savannah, while seemingly honoring Susan King Taylor in Savannah's black community with a token, by context, Outside of the numerous squares and demographic imbalance that markedly persists, the legacy of Hitlerian inspiration, Calhoun and his philosophical heft in the antebellum colonial and federal white supremacist project are still alive and well in Savannah now. A renaming without proper historiographic development and continuity allows truth to simply go away, remain cloaked. Calhoun, as well as Andrew Jackson, Hitler, Jefferson Davis, Henry Ford, and etc. represent a web historiographic circumstance which has yet to be disclosed or unpacked or contextualized. Those associated histories, along with the wealth, power skew, and dispossession they represent as either Confederate or federal projects, have been shorted in the records. In other words, the scope of the beautiful historic city, Savannah, and region has bent light around its affiliation to a larger tainted truth. That truth uncloaks the mired circumstance of the coastal empire, which daily performs in the same record of disparity, skew, and plunder as it always had, yesterday and today. The aggregated harms, benefits, and dividends of the present owe to formulated philosophies, practices, education, and law which thrived in the past. The outlay of those connections, as well as their inherent disparities, presently sustained and oriented through travel and leisure industry, patriotic mythology, public policy, and eco-cultural threats, have yet to be explored or exposed or translated into useful gains which otherwise could be used to help marginalized communities. No amount of renaming or identity framing might cover over or undo that lack. Those actions only further distance and mask needed illumination. See the Savannah Theater and Alexander Stevens' speech on the Confederacy, the cornerstone of the Confederacy, how he frames the presence or the humanity of African people below humanity, as things, as near animals, or what peculiar species of property. Only a concerted, countervailing enterprise to unveil the truth of those connections, followed up with comprehensive historiographic presence of otherwise omitted legacies might do. Renaming merely puts a black face or gendered face on the same untended problem, and often garners a twofer win used to satisfy race gender quotas or woke performance. QUAMINO Dolly, in his role in the capture Savannah and consequential siege of Savannah, where again the African presence was decisive, points up capture in other terms. QUAMINO exposed a contradiction in the docility, naturalized and blindsided oligarchy. Simply, when everyone follows the leader in one unquestioned direction. QUAMINO Dolly did not follow that direction. He went against everything and everyone he was supposed to follow. The expectation of his loyalty to masters was supposed to supersede and undo any claim he might have to his rights as a free-willed human being, particularly one operating in a grand cause of liberty. His loyalty to the master was expected. The usual rule of authority and flow, the slave system, was supposed to groove him into obedience, where he followed every rule of it and every framing issue of it. But QUAMINO Dolly, just like his unusual name, came into things with a different rhythm. He broke the supposed sequence and syntax. He broke the cadence. He marched to a different drummer, creatively maladjusted his contribution rather than an appropriation abused by slave industry and present-day profit, was rather to the ideals of liberty and freedom, indivisible and unabridged. He unabashedly demanded the sovereignty purported in the otherwise hypocritical claims of War of Independence sycophants. He syncopated and polyriddim his way out of a groove meant to contain his spirit. That was slavery, then as now. Yet, freedom is the heart to make revolution. Today's Yalpin and Buna segment is a meditation upon a theme. Of course, Yalpin, the native people's medicinal tea drink, chosen in ceremony to stimulate brave, candid, and powerful speech about relevant community needs, and Buna, the East African coffee drink in Abol, Tona, and Barak, a ceremony which produces fiery discourse and truth-telling for community benefit, are the foundation of our Yalpin and Buna dialogues. Think on this. To escape is to suggest a pathway, trail, or gateway to where or when freedom, liberty exists. Simply speaking, it is somewhere other than where you currently are. To rebel is both to demand and then establish freedom when and where urgent empowerment and agency manifests itself. In other words, liberty belongs to you, and you create it in the place you command. Freedom, or liberty, is to know an existential circumstance with no spatial or temporal predicates, without either teleology or telemetry, with no beginning or end. The demand and declaration are self-evident. In short, freedom is a quality of consciousness, no matter where you are, and you project it into every place you go. We welcome you now to the eco-cultural corner concept, a place of deep contemplation about the ecology and the encompassing embrace it shares with mankind and all beings in its scope. Our guest, climate activist, Laura Shadley. For both native Yalpan and East African Buna practices, the idea is to communicate openly and with integrity, to honor contact and open dialogue, and to recognize the sacred dimensions of forthright truth-telling. The work that earth-protecting indigenous people do all over the world speaks to a long-term, lifelong devotion to the quality of earth and the integration of living things in it. It's not about single issues, causes, or current news items. It exists as a truth of stewardship, living and in ecological respect. So Laura, why is it important, or do you think that it's important, to reveal and engage in a more life-encompassing knowledge?
Well, I was just thinking about, we were talking about that river yesterday when I was listening to some of the elders discuss how the damage was done to it. And I'm just waking up to a lot of this knowledge. It's always been there, I'm sure, but I think that's where a lot of us are too. But the river, they were showing us how it was straightening out in some of the areas, and then we were having that discussion yesterday, which reminded me of the straightening out of humanity, like the straightening out of the rivers and why and how the ways of water is not allowed to do what it's supposed to be doing, the way it's cutting off the growth of the reeds and the other water plants next to the river. And they were showing us, they were explaining all that as he was flying the drone over the river. It just kind of reminded me a lot of like where we are as a human race, especially in more so-called advanced societies, and how we've gotten away from that, and we've been fighting to straighten the rivers instead of letting the rivers meander and do what it does best, because it has that wisdom, it has that thousands and thousands of years of knowledge and understanding of the landscapes and what each life force, what each living being needs. And I'm looking at this water out here, and it is man-made. You know, it's able to do its thing, and animals are able to come here and find food and shelter and the things that it needs, but it still lacks in a lot of that understanding that we don't have to constantly be trying to straighten the river in order for anything to make sense to us. I feel like we're trying to manipulate and control too many things, and it's only causing more and more damage. And I feel like the more we try to straighten and control ourselves and other living beings, you know, our children, the next generations, it's causing so many problems within our understanding, because deep down inside of us we have a different kind of an understanding of how things are supposed to be. It's left to do what it does best, what Mother Earth does best, and also with our care and support and some management. You know, we are a part of that system. We are nature as well, but it doesn't mean that we have to control everything. We're not meant to straighten the river, and we're not meant to dig everything out and make it into our own image, or what we believe that is our image, because that's not what our image is, because we believe ourselves to be separate or above nature. And that's completely where we've gone wrong. And I think that it's important for us to remember that, and however we can remember that. And I don't know what to say to people who are so cut off from their roots, so cut off from their understanding of who they were. And I don't mean like Black and Indigenous people. I mean like people who have been hundreds and thousands of years even from who they were as people who lived upon the earth in a good way, the way they see that we do. When they're talking about Indigenous people and how we lived in such a way with the earth and a balance, you know, and we're still struggling to do that. But we're very much on the cusp as well, where we can choose to turn and walk away from that as well. We have to be very careful. And I think that people say that, like Russell Means said, that white folks are the next Indians. What happened to the natives is going to happen to the settlers. But really, what happened to the settlers can also happen to us. And we are on that cusp right now where we need to make that decision of how much do we assimilate, how much do we let go of who we are. You know, I think in that way there is no separation. You know, we are all humans and we are all capable of making the right decisions. And I think we spend enough time in areas where that are more natural. I'm not saying that a lot of places have been reforested. They have been managed to a point of, I guess managed too much, you know, controlled. So it's kind of hard. And even when I was sitting in Skidaway and I looked at some of the history on the plaques, and I never knew that whole place was completely cleared. And all of those trees and that growth there was not that old, like 150 years old. So what I was actually looking at was a man-made forest. I mean, they completely destroyed the whole forest and managed it in a different kind of a way, and it looks wild, but it really isn't, because we think that we have to constantly go in and control everything for whatever it is we needed. At that time, I think it was for food and war and other different things, you know. So, you know, we really don't even know what we're looking at sometimes. What we think of as wild, like that tree over there, growing in a way that doesn't look like anybody's been pruning it and trimming it. It's actually not even been here that long. It's because somebody knocked all these things down and created this waterway and tailored this park the way they think it should look for aesthetics. You know, this is a beautiful place, but it's not beautiful in the way that it was intended when it was created. I don't even know what was here before, but yes, it's a nice place to come and visit and get away from this life that we've created, which is another issue. You know, we're constantly living a life that we feel we have to make other places to get away from that. And that's not what it means to be part of all of this. And as Indigenous people, we live our life in a way that you don't want to escape your life. That is our life. And people don't understand that. You know, it's not get up and go fight the pipeline. You know, it's not, okay, and then go back to whatever it is you were doing before. It's be about protecting that land and be about what it is, because it's not just detrimental to your way of life, it's detrimental to all of the life that's on that land. So many things that we don't think about existing within the soil, even things that we might not find beautiful at all, or a nuisance or troublesome, all had its own right to live and exist. And we just don't take any of those things into consideration. And they wake up every day, and this is what they do. No matter what we do to the earth, they wake up every day knowing that they have a responsibility. And they are the reason why a lot of this exists. Yeah, we might come in and tailor a lot of these things and make it into the way we think it should be, and where it's more pretty, you know. But what is really making it beautiful are the plants and the animals that come here and call this place home, you know. So we need to get back to that understanding of our responsibility We always talk about rights, our right as human beings, our human rights, but we consider nothing else on this planet having a right in that way, not animals, and we can barely fathom the idea of plants and water having rights. But there are a lot of people in different areas of the world who are fighting for and have won the rights for different bodies of water. But plants, we talk a lot about veganism and all these things, owning animals and all these things that we get confused. But everything has a right to exist because we didn't create it. Some other being, some other force put this all here, put us here. It has just as much right to exist as we do. So, we're forgetting our place. And I don't know. What else? If I have anything else to add.
Well, that's it for this month. Kanapaha, Yaupan and Buna, an eco-cultural concept corner. Which way, Savannah? QUAMINO Dolly. I captured Savannah, but you can't capture my spirit. Please join us again for our revolution and liberation ceremonies, peace and freedom. Freedom is the heart to make revolution.